What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and welcome to an HDR Q&A. You guys asked questions, and I decided to give some answers before I take off for the day. So I ended up uploading a video. A bunch of people had a bunch of questions about it afterwards, and I answered some of those, but then I decided, you know what? Let's go ahead, let's jump in, let's see what some of these questions are. And when I did so, I realized, holy crap, every single person has some really, really good questions that I think are pertinent. And I want to say thanks to the people who jumped on Patreon and helped me out today. That was awesome. And the people who donated today, because one guy was like, you just saved me like $700. I was gonna buy the wrong TV, one that didn't, I guess, have a 10-bit display. So I appreciate that. I'm glad this stuff gets out there. As a consumer-based channel, that's what this is about, is making sure, whether it be game reviews to get you guys the information prior so that you know what you're getting into. Even if you don't agree with my overall ending statement, you may at least understand why I came to it, and you can choose on your own. That's what I want to do with TVs, especially here. Now, one person asked me a question that won't be in the Q&A, but I'm going to answer it prior to it. And they said, you seem like you're almost angry about HDR being announced or negative towards it. Are you? I'm not at all, actually. I have HDR stuff. My negativity stems from these console manufacturers basically blurting it out as if it's magic and it works on every system. And it doesn't need every single thing to be changed to get it to run, which in fact, for many people, it will require just that if they want to put it into their system content. That bothers me to a high degree. And of course, it's typical brinksmanship. No one wanted to admit that, but you have all these wars on Twitter where it's like, we do 4K, we have a real Blu-ray player, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, will anyone of you check mark next to the section that says, buy me a new fucking, receiver, or buy me a new sound bar if I use that? So it just, that does piss me off. Because as a consumer and somebody who tells people what might be worth it and not worth it, I think that that a lot of the truth isn't out there. So let's just jump in. Does HDR benefit a 1080p television? No. The PS4 Pro, because of its faster speed, will go a little bit better. Just like the Xbox One S, there's already been a couple different people with videos that have seen a couple frames per second faster. That'll work just as well on a 1080p TV as well. That HDR signal just won't be read by the TV. The TV won't know what to do with it, and it'll come out as a normal signal. The system itself will basically say, yeah, you're not HDR, you don't get the cool shit. Totally normal. It will not benefit a 1080p system that we know of. The only 1080p monitors I know of are test monitors that do HDR as well. HDR is in some way tied to the 4K. So, next what? Do you need a new monitor if I'm a PC gamer? Yeah. The HDR standard that's coming out using the 10-bit color is different than what monitors do right now. And so, yes, there is a new standard of what's going on and how that is handled by your monitor. So if you do want to jump, we're starting to see a couple different companies announced something after AMD basically did their announcement and started talking about HDR content as well. You started seeing some monitor companies sort of make a couple little inroads towards it. But remember, these are different technologies. HDR is intrinsically, it started out as a color-based movie technology and photography technology, not a game technology. It's more about doing these things for movies. It's one of the reasons why nobody cared about the input lag I talked about, because they were just like, it's a movie. So we can tap on HDR, we can tap on interpolation, all these crazy things, because it can all sync up in the end after it's run all of the filters on the picture, and you can have this awesome looking picture. And then what you have is a gamer going, well, I want to do the same thing. And then they're like, well, we got to figure something out. Otherwise, your input lag is going to be like 500. So let's see. Can I use my old sound bar? I just sort of spoke about this. This is a huge question, and it's completely legitimate because sound bars really seem to take off in the last generation. If you use HDMI to connect to your sound bar, and that HDMI then leaves your sound bar and connects to your TV, yes, you will have to replace it. Now, they could be firmware upgraded, but I haven't heard of any company doing that, nor do I think any company has a USB device on the back of their sound bar. But if you do, you could certainly check to see prior. You will need to replace it if you want to run it the same way. Now, there is one way to do it. You could use a splitter. What that is you take your 4K output from your PlayStation 4 Pro, and it goes into the back of the splitter, and there's two HDMI cables that come out, both 4K. One goes to your audio system, and one would go to your TV. That would basically allow for the soundbar to still get the sound from the HDMI cable, and of course your TV to now get the 4K output. That's pretty much it. That's basically the way you're going to do it. There are some receivers that are coming out that are 4K that have two outputs. You could also do it there because it's built right in. You wouldn't need a splitter. It's got one in the receiver. But regardless, You have to do something there. Now, if you have or if you have a soundbar connected with optical cables or some other, even a headphone cable style, that will stay the same. That won't be affected. This is HDMI only. So interesting situation there for sure. What needs to upscale? The Xbox One, the PlayStation, or my receiver? Well, for the most part, the PlayStation 4 Pro, right? That'll do its own upscaling. So you can turn it off in the receiver and turn it off in the TV. But the PS4 and the Xbox One output natively at 1080. The Xbox One's upscales some games, but it does it internally. And so you can basically have all that off, and then the TV will basically upscale at that point. The TV scalers, you sometimes hear me have a legacy complaint where I'll be like, oh, TV scalers, but they used to be terrible. They're getting much better. In fact, there's some stuff that was introduced last year at, I think it was a CES, where it was, and it might have been this year, where there was some really, really cool new scalers in some of these TVs that not only just doubled the pixels and made a 1080p to a 4K, but they actually adjusted things and looked at edge detection and did some pretty crazy stuff, which is somewhat what's already in the Xbox, of course, and the PS4. So when it comes down to scaling, basically, you just have to understand wherever the native source is coming from. If it's 4K, nothing else really needs to do anything. Your TV's going to see it. If it isn't 4K, something's going to have to scale, and most of the time the TV will sense that and do it itself anyway. Let's see. Will my speakers still work with a new receiver? That's actually a good question. It's different than the soundbar. If you've got 5.1, 7.2 speakers, all that kind of stuff, yeah, that'll all work. What you need to watch out for is if you're one of those people that might have a Logitech system where it's got like the bass speaker that's connected by the big thick wire and stuff like that, you have some weirdness there, but usually those aren't HDMI. So all of that stuff will most likely work. The only way it wouldn't is if you bought one of those, you're maybe living in a dorm or something and you buy a 5.1 where the wires are all connected to the back of the speakers. If you're running HDMI into that to get your sound, then you won't be able to upgrade to a 4K. You won't be able to run from that into a TV. You'll have to figure out something else like the splitter if you want to keep it. Next thing up, are some receivers faking HDR support? That's a good question. I now have 3 emails out to 3 different receiver companies because they all have receivers in the same families that slightly describe HDR content differently, and that bothers the shit out of me. I don't want to say who they are right now because I don't want to give them positive or negative feedback of any kind until I get their information. But if you look on some websites, it'll be like HDR, like supports HDR. And then the other one will say supports blah, blah, blah. And it's parts of HDR. And that makes me really worried. If I find out, I will make sure I tell you guys ASAP. But it could be something weird. You guys know me, though. I usually believe that if somebody takes the extra time to not copy and paste and write in a new description in a different receiver, that usually makes me a little nervous because it makes me feel like they're trying to get around something. GTX 970. Let's see. What is HDR? You know what? I explained that in the other video, so I would say go check the other video. I'll put a link here for you guys to see it. That'll prime you for these questions anyway, because some of these are built on that. Am I going to see the difference? I don't see the difference in 1080p and 1440p, much due to where I sit. Yes, you would see the difference in a Game Boy screen as long as it was full color. The difference in HDR is really not reliant on your resolution or size of the screen, as long as we're not talking a fucking postal stamp. By that point, it just doesn't matter. But yes, you will be able to see it. It will be a massive difference. One thing I want to warn you guys about is not everybody likes the difference. Of all the people I know who've seen HDR, I would say about 3 did not like it. Everybody sees just a slight bit different. You know, some people are colorblind to one color or to some colors, some aren't. Some people have better visual acuity, you know, that kind of thing. Some people just don't like certain colors. And of course, HDR is all about that. HDR is all about the brightness and sort of blooming those out. So I can see some people not liking it or taking more time to get accustomed to, but I cannot see anyone looking at it and saying this is a 720p, 1080p, or 900p, 1080p difference. No way. You're not going to have that issue. If anybody tries to tell you they can't see HDR, there's a problem with their eyes or a problem with their lies. Next thing up. Why does the brightness matter? Well, the brightness matters because HDR inherently spreads out the distance between the darkest dark and the brightest bright. So the brighter you can get, the better the picture. OLED TVs, which are really expensive, and I don't really talk about them much, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, they go and they can do the darkest dark on the pixel. They basically turn it off. And so until we see those prices drop down, I'm not going to talk about those much. Usually what you'll see here is a good spread. They'll try to get as dark as they can, but they'll also crank up their brightness brightness as much as possible, so you can get that difference between pixel to pixel. The next up, when will prices come down? This Christmas, I'm sure we're going to see prices really drop dramatically on some of these as sales. And what happens, I don't know if a lot of people understand like how retail companies work, but a lot of times, yes, they are trying to sell off old stock, but they're also trying to see what sells. They do a lot of tracking and a lot of identification. And it's like, okay, do we need to continue this? Is this not being purchased? Is this being purchased? That kind of thing. So I think we'll see a drop in price. And then a couple months later, we'll actually see what that drop in price will entail for future technologies and what's sort of being picked up and what isn't. Let's see. Is Edge Lit HDR worthless, or is that elitism? I think most of it is actually just nut crunching fear when it comes to how much money these cost and wanting to make sure you don't make a mistake. Edge Lit is less accurate for a actual improvement that is all about accuracy. I can't really describe that enough. The actual inherent strength of HDR is its accuracy and more accuracy. And so Edge Lit is less accurate as a display. So to jump into this new technology, it causes some issues. The reason why you're hearing at all about Edge Lit is because 2 or 3 of the Edge Lit TVs have really low input lag, so people are buying them anyway, regardless of the fact that if you see HDR on a normal TV with really good local dimming and you see it on an Edge Lit TV, even if it's got local dimming, because of the way the two work, it's insane. I mean, yes, maybe the Edge Lit can get brighter at certain points, but the actual accuracy is just much better. And I've had them all, so or been able to have some close-up views of all of them. I found a monitor that does 4K and has super fast response time but no HDR. Should I favor 4K or should I favor HDR? That's completely up to you, and it's completely up to your price point. I think that HDR is a massive changeover, and I would rather see 1080p HDR than jump to 4K without it. That's just me. What is good input lag on a TV? It's different than it is on a monitor, but on a TV, I would say you're looking at the really good ones that add HDR on to the signal. So all of it together, like I said in the last one, it's like 22 to 28. So that's what we consider good. What I mean by that is, if you look at the entire field, those are the good ones. It doesn't mean that's good in the entire world. It just means when it comes to what is available right now, that's good. I'd like to see that sub 12. Let's see. I found a monitor that does... Oh, nope, I answered that. Do I need the monster cable thingies? No, you don't. You just make sure you get 4K cables and you'll be good to go. And they're easy to find. You don't need the gold ones. You don't need the ones that I found. I found some ones on Amazon from Saudi Arabia that were like $10,000. You don't need those. Let's see. Why are OLEDs so damned expensive? They're just a new technology. And as he says, $5,000. Yeah, easy. They're just a new technology. They look amazing, though, but new technology is always like that. Karak, what does 4:4:4 mean when it comes to a color stat? That's chroma subsampling. And the easiest way to describe it is that what it does is it samples particular things on a picture. Let's say you were trying to repaint a Van Gogh. You could do it fast or you could do it somewhat fast. Somewhat fast would be more accurate. Fast would be a little less accurate, but you would be done quicker. Chroma subsampling, if you see 442, that's something to worry about, because what that means is they're taking four samples, and then in the next one, I think it's horizontal, they're taking 2 samples, which is less than 444, obviously. And what happens is that can lower your picture. In fact, I believe some of the Vizio HDR TVs, even though I like their TVs, I'm not a fan of their input lag, but a couple of them are 442, I believe. And so that is actually an issue, and that is, once again, impacting accuracy. For me, I'd rather have accuracy and watch a good movie that looked amazing, or play a slower game that didn't require input lag, than getting a fast input lag and buying a TV that had somewhat okay HDR. But that's just me. Let's see. Are HDR receivers more expensive? Absolutely not. Strangely enough, because 4K and HDR are sort of synonymous, we've noticed that there haven't been a huge number of price changes when it comes to 4K receivers. So it's just like 4K and HDR, and that's pretty much it. Just make sure the receiver covers both. They usually don't have a price premium. Maybe it's in the $20 to $70 range, but I haven't noticed, because once you get into the price range to buy these anyway, they're not super expensive, but once you get into that price range anyway, they fluctuate all by themselves. How long can I go with HDMI cables? Oh, how long can you make HDMI cables? Yeah, the same exact length as any HDMI cables you see. There's 4Ks with boosters and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't really have any connection with that. I have no money to buy a new monitor. What do I do? No, I don't have new money to buy a new receiver. What can I do? I apologize. I read that wrong. Uh, a, a splitter, yeah, for sure. A splitter is the way to go. So let's say you have your PlayStation 4 Pro, you buy it, and you just don't want to replace your receiver. Is there a way to get around this? Yes, there is one way to buy and I talked about this in the other video. Buy a separate splitter and split out of the PlayStation or the Xbox One S into the receiver to get audio, and then to the TV. I talked about it earlier with the sound bar. So then your receiver would get that 4K signal. It wouldn't know what to do, but that's fine because it'll just be playing music, the music from the game, and then your signal will go into the TV. Let's see. My current TV is low. My current TV is 30 ms. Is that good? 30 milliseconds. Is that a good latency? It's okay on TVs, but it's not considered good outside of that. And then, why can't I find examples of HDR games all over? Well, that's actually a really good point. It's the one reason why I tell people to wait. Their media isn't there, guys. It is not there. These companies are rolling out HDR as fast as they can. Sony's got their games that they're getting ready to patch, and Microsoft's got Gears and Forza, and the NBA 2K17, right? That's coming out. Those will all support it, but right now there isn't a ton of support needed for it. So that's why you can't see examples. So if you want to see an example of something, you have to go find it because it's just not on the internet for a lot of these things. You can't say HDR games because true HDR games, there's not a lot of video of. And of course, then when you go and look at the video, you're probably not viewing it on an HDR display. Next thing up, can I just go to someone's house and check their HDR device? Yeah. However, if you go to somebody's house and you look at their Sony TV and you play on their Sony TV and then you go and decide to buy a Vizio, my friend, you might be in trouble distinctly because of that input lag situation. So you gotta watch out for that. And then, is it worth the money? No. No, I mean, there's just being me, guys. Yeah, it's not worth the money right now. I just said it. There's not enough media out there right now. I test it because I know that some people out there have the money and will have HDR. So when I test Forza and when I review it, I'll review it both for people who have HDR and people who don't, and I'll talk about it. But when it comes down to it, I had one person who really wanted an example from me of a TV that was worth it, and they basically just were dragging me. I was just like, no, man. I mean, maybe this, but I'm just warning you right now. It's not a situation in which I think you should jump into it and spend a bunch of money just so you can turn around and possibly have to do it again later. We don't know how games are going to work on these. We don't know if EdgeLit is going to turn your Stormtrooper on your normal Star Wars Battlefront game into what looks like a damn person with a flashlight on their head. We don't know how these things are going to look because games inherently display different than friggin' movies. They have different planes of existence, and you have that constant, I'm in a constant cockpit here. Is this going to be different than a movie where you're in a cockpit for 30 seconds in Top Gun and you don't really notice blooming and those kind of things? Games are different, and obviously we can see that. Why? How we can see that? Because HDR on top of the normal signal adds so much latency. It's obvious that they're different because the TV companies didn't even know what to do with it, and they're just now making headway in making it so that you can use them. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked it. I want to say thanks again to the people who donated on Patreon. I'm glad I saved you some cash. It's going to be interesting to go forward as we do. I'll continue to try to give you accurate information. Feel free to leave a comment in the YouTube channel. If you like the video, hit like. If you dislike the video, hit dislike. And as always, peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.